We know from the biblical narrative that everyone, including the Nephilims, except for Noah's family, perished in the Great Flood. However, Genesis chapter 6 verse 4 offers an intriguing clue that some Nephilim may have survived. The verse states they were on the earth in those days and also afterward, implying their presence both before and after the flood. It naturally raises the question, how did they reappear after the flood? Do any descendants of these biblical giants still exist today? To explore these controversial possibilities, let's first have a little lesson regarding these beings. Whenever we use the term Nephilim, it is typically translated to mean giants or fallen ones. In Genesis chapter 6 verse 4, they are described as heroes of old, men of renown. While the Genesis narrative only mentions these giants briefly, they capture significant attention in later apocalyptic literature, particularly in the Book of Enoch. Their precise origins are a subject of scholarly debate, yet a widely accepted theory among biblical scholars suggests that the Nephilim were the offspring of unions between the sons of God, often interpreted as fallen angels, and the daughters of men, specifically human women and the daughters of Adam. According to this theory, a group of angels overwhelmed by desire engaged with human women, resulting in a race of giants that corrupted God's creation so severely that he had no choice but to cleanse the earth with a flood. These hybrids are viewed as superhuman because they represent an anomaly in the natural order, entities that God never intended to exist. They are a cross between celestial beings meant for heaven and terrestrial beings designed for earth. One theory proposes that demons attempted to corrupt the human bloodline to prevent the coming of the Messiah. According to Genesis chapter 3 verse 15, God prophesied that the Messiah would crush the serpent, Satan. By intermingling with humans in Genesis chapter 6, these demons may have sought to avert this prophecy, attempting to ensure that a sinless seed of the woman could not be born. The concept of superhuman beings is not unique to Christianity. Throughout the ancient Near East and Mediterranean, myths commonly told of gods who fell in love with human women, engaged in intimate relations with them, and produced offspring with extraordinary size, strength, and abilities. For instance, in ancient Greek mythology, Zeus fathered the hero Heracles, or known as Hercules in Roman mythology, through an encounter with the mortal woman Alcmene. But there's a more grounded alternative theory that explains the origins of the Nephilims. It's suggested that the sons of God were descendants of Seth, the third son of Adam, while the daughters of men were the less righteous daughters of Cain. This theory, however, faces a substantial obstacle. The exceptional size and characteristics of the Nephilim challenge the notion that they were simply human descendants. Their supernatural qualities have led many to support the idea that the Nephilim were indeed the result of unions between angels and humans. When we speak about the Nephilim, it's always with a negative connotation, since they're being attributed to being the cause of the Great Flood. This belief stems from the fact that their mention is immediately followed by the introduction of the flood narrative in the Bible, and their name, meaning fallen ones, suggests wrongdoing. However, some scholars dispute this interpretation, pointing out that Genesis chapter 6 verse 4 offers only praise for the Nephilim without any criticism, suggesting a different understanding of their nature. Furthermore, the term fallen ones likely refers to their divine lineage transitioning or falling into the human realm, though still maintaining an almost superhuman state. Therefore, your perspective on the Nephilim depends on which theory you subscribe to. Now let's return to our initial question. Could the Nephilim have survived the flood? And might they still exist among us today? References to the Nephilim resurface long after the flood, particularly in Numbers chapter 13, verses 32 to 33. In Moses' time, when the spies returned from scouting the Promised Land, they unanimously reported that the land was rich and bountiful. However, 10 of the spies expressed doubt that Israel could conquer the land due to the formidable inhabitants they observed there. The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. In this account, the Nephilims are identified as descendants of Anak and noted for their great size, echoing the description in Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, where they are called heroes of old, men of renown. In both scenarios, they are portrayed as formidable opponents, especially in the close quarters combat essential for conquering the Promised Land. Many supporters of the theory that the Nephilim reappeared also propose that Goliath was one of these giant Nephilims, but it could be argued that the Nephilim simply became a semi-technical term for giant warrior. The descendants of Anak, known as the Anakim, were clearly a group of large individuals. In addition to reporting on the Anakim, the spies in verse 28 of the account also described many other inhabitants of the land as strong. While several passages acknowledge the Anakim as a powerful group, it is only in Numbers chapter 13, verse 33, that a direct connection between the Anakites and the Nephilim is suggested. It's crucial to understand that the Anakim originated from populations that existed after the flood, meaning they could not have descended from the pre-flood Nephilim. Supporting this point further, Genesis chapter 10, which details the table of nations, the descendants of Noah's sons, does not list Anak or the Nephilim among those who survived the flood. Hence, we can conclude that the Nephilims mentioned in the time of Moses and Joshua were not the descendants of the pre-flood Nephilim. Additionally, it's worth noting that the spies delivered a negative or evil report about these giant warriors. Out of the 12 spies, only Joshua and Caleb, who had faith in God, were eager to enter and take possession of the land. The remaining 10 were reluctant. This misleading report spread fear across the nation, deterring them from entering the Promised Land and causing them to turn against Moses for bringing them to this point. How can we verify that the report of the spies was inaccurate? By examining God's response to the Israelites' lack of faith. Initially, God intended to afflict all the people with a plague, but Moses interceded for them. Nevertheless, those who were not spared were the ones who delivered the misleading report, as mentioned in Numbers chapter 14, verses 36 to 37. Now the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land, who returned and made all the congregation complain against him by bringing a bad report of the land, those very men who brought the evil report about the land died by the plague before the Lord. Going back to our main question, it is highly unlikely that any modern individuals are descendants of the Nephilim. This viewpoint is strengthened by the absence of evidence to the contrary. The probable reason why Nephilim no longer exist today is that the fallen angels who created them have faced God's judgment. As stated in Jude chapter 1 verse 6, these angels did not remain in their designated roles, but abandoned their proper stations. They are now bound with everlasting chains, awaiting the final day of judgment, a measure taken to prevent any further attempts by demons to commit such sins. Nevertheless, some scholars suggest that the theme of the Nephilim and their offspring resurfaces in end-time prophecies found in the Bible. For example, Revelation chapter 9 speaks of a vast army of 200 million peculiar creatures that will unleash a plague, resulting in the death of a third of humanity. The exact nature and characteristics of these beings remain unclear, yet some speculate that they could be descendants of the Nephilim, revived to battle in the end-time conflicts. Another prophecy supporting this theory is found in Luke chapter 21, verse 26, which describes people being paralyzed with fear and foreboding over the events unfolding on earth in the last days. The passage foretells that the powers of heaven will be shaken, and people will collapse in terror at the sight of what is approaching. This scenario could potentially involve the resurrection of the Nephilim and their descendants through a malevolent supernatural event, signaling the earth's final days. While these prophecies are subject to diverse interpretations, they merit consideration alongside the legends and tales of giants from around the world. Time alone will reveal whether the resurgence of the Nephilim and their descendants is an inevitable reality or merely part of myths and legends. What are your thoughts about this? We hope you like our story, and we'll catch you in the next one.